はい、皆さん、こんにちは。米国特許セミナー、パテントターミノロジーです。このシリーズでは、特許用語、表現などをできるだけわかりやすく解説しています。講師は、米国特許弁護士であるブライアン・エプスタインさんです。今回は、設けられていると、取り付けられているという表現について見ていきたいと思います。ではまず、設けられているについてブライアンさんにご解説いただきます。設けられているに対応する表現、英語表現は located をはじめとしていくつかあるんですが、これらの違いについて聞いてみたいと思います。So, Brian さん、設けられている is typically translated as located, positioned, placed, disposed, or arranged. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So, um, when I first looked at all of these translations for "Oke rareteru" or "Haichi sareteru," um, I made a list of the words and went to Merriam-Webster and just looked at the definitions for located, positioned, placed, disposed, arranged, and really compared them to each other. These words are quite similar in English. Sometimes they are defined in terms of each other. So it's really difficult to distinguish how, you know, different located is compared to the other words, for example. Um, and this isn't these sessions that for patent terminology are pretty informal. We're not doing a formal presentation about linguistics. And so it seems like arranged seems to be the best definition for a general case. I don't know the specifics of any particular case that somebody is translating. Um, I was a little surprised to see that, to be honest. I did not expect arranged to be um, just really good for a general case. I expected it to be more like disposed, um, but I think arranged is probably the best. And so for the words placed and disposed, in particular, these can mean arranged, um, but they can also have different meanings. And I think that's kind of the issue is that when we discuss how these cases might get litigated based on these words, we want some certainty as to how they will be interpreted. And, arranged always means arranged. I don't know what that necessarily is, right? There might be several definitions, but it always means that. Placed and disposed, um, again, have definitions that mean arranged, but they also have different meanings. And so I think um, a litigator might argue that placed and disposed mean something different. They mean one of these other definitions. And so there's some uncertainty there as to what placed and disposed means or mean. And maybe they're not as good for a general case. Maybe in a particular instance, they are better. But I think overall, I would favor arranged. Again, there's a pretty long list for moke rareteru. And so for position, for example, this word can be a little narrow because it kind of requires a certainty as to where something is positioned. And I worry that, because of that certainty, it might be too narrow to say positioned in a general case. Might limit the claim a little bit more than is necessary, since these are, um, I think, intended to be slightly broad terms. On the other hand, the word locate can be unintentionally broad. That's because this word can relate to an indication. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's located in a very specific location. It means it can just, indicate a general area for the location. And I would have concerns, particularly with regards to broadest reasonable interpretation, that maybe locate is interpreted broader than an applicant intended. And so again, that's why I kind of favor these other words like arrange, is that locate's just a little too vague. Maybe some prior art it is within the scope of locate that might not be within the scope of arranged. But the real issue here is that our prosecution concerns, for example, the breadth of the word locate or the narrowness of the word positions, these prosecution concerns are less important than our litigation concerns. The USPTO will accept all of these words. They will probably interpret them in a very similar scope. What we're concerned with here is litigation. And so the best answer, if we're just translating for like a Paris Convention application as opposed to a PCT, is to avoid using all of the words. Why? So the reason is that a litigator could argue that by having words like arranged or located, that these are in fact product by process claims under which are discussed in MPEP 2173.05P1. And as a result, these claims will be interpreted more narrowly than anticipated by the applicant. There might be concerns about mixed statutory classes as well. And so what we're trying to avoid here is litigating a product by process claim, or indeed any kind of claim that might have mixed statutory classes. And so a lot of US patent attorneys will just delete these words. They don't really add significant meaning to the claims, and the claims will generally read about the same meaning without these phrases.
はい。では次に、取り付けられているについて、見ていきます。取り付けられているは、attached や mounted と、英訳されることもあるんですが、この使い分けについて見ていきたいと思います。So, Brian さん、取り付けられている is typically translated into attached or mounted. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure. So, for 取り付けられている, attached is relevantly defined as to make fast, such as by tying or gluing. And so I think there's some concern about the strength of this connection. Make fast really implies this strong connection. And so my concern is, what if something separates easily? What if an accused infringer can argue that, well, the patentee's claim covers something that is attached, something that's made fast, something that's glued very strongly, and ours separates quite easily. Ours isn't attached. Ours is mounted, or is only partially attached. They'll come up with some other word to describe their connection that isn't as strong as attached. Maybe it's perforated, um, and so I wouldn't necessarily pursue attached here. There's also a broadest reasonable interpretation concern, as always, um, that attached covers something like indirectly attached. So, then we start um, getting into concerns like, what is indirectly attached mean? What's the scope of that? What's the scope of directly attached? Is that overly limiting? Would a phrase like directly attached overly limit the scope of a patent? And so I would worry about using a phrase like attached. On the other hand, the phrase mounted is relevantly defined as to set on something that elevates or to attach to a support. Um, and I guess I should clarify that when I say relevantly defined, all of these words have multiple meanings. And when I look at these, I'm thinking about, which one is likely to apply in a given patent context, which ones might apply in several contexts. And so, I could be wrong that um, it, the particular definition applied in a specific litigation, whether or not that's this phrase, I don't know. Because again, different dictionaries will have different definitions as well. And I believe these are all Merriam-Webster for this session. And, maybe it's a different edition of Merriam-Webster. Maybe it's, the Oxford English Dictionary. I'm not really sure, what's going to be applied in any particular case. But again, that's what was used here was Merriam-Webster, I think. Anyway, so my point is that based on these definitions, the phrase mounted seems more appropriate for the general case. Just setting on something is pretty broad. There would be a concern about, whether or not we're attaching, we've got that phrase attached there. So this is, I guess, in some respects narrower than attached. But because we have these multiple definitions, mounted seems a little bit more appropriate generally. But again, just like with located, we have these same product by process concerns. And so the general advice when drafting claims is to just avoid or try to avoid using these phrases entirely. So instead of saying attached to, maybe you'll just say, or attached to a support. It'll just be like on a support. Similarly with mounted, the general strategy is to just strike through the word. So instead of saying mounted on, we just say on, and it will have basically the same definition. I'm not sure that works for attached to. If you just said, something is attached to a support, I don't think you could just say, to a support. But if you said, attached on a support, you could probably say on a support. And so we're just trying to find other phrases that don't have these kind of verbs, mounted, attached, located. They suggest, that's the basis for this product by process concern. That's the concern, maybe in some corner cases with regards to mixed statutory classes. And that's what we're trying to avoid. So again, if we can write the claim without using any of these verbs, great. Maybe just use a preposition and see how your claim sounds from there.
はい。ありがとうございました。設けられていると、取り付けられているという表現は、特許明細書で非常によく使われるため、今日の解説は個人的に非常に参考になりました。はい、今回はこれで以上になります。ご質問や使ってほしいトピックなどがありましたら、YouTube のコメント欄に書いていただくか、スライド最後に記載のメールアドレスまでお気軽にご連絡ください。では本日もありがとうございました。失礼します。